Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's panel. My name is Eve Kelly, and I serve as the Associate Director for Strategic Initiatives and Senior Advisor to the Vice President in the Office of Institutional Transformation. I'd like to thank the co-sponsors of this event, the Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights, the Initiative on Race and Resilience, the Notre Dame Institute for Advanced Studies, and the Office of Institutional Transformation. Envisioned as a tool to help remedy historical discrimination and create more diverse student bodies, affirmative action policies have permitted colleges and universities to factor in students' racial backgrounds during the admissions process. This supplementary consideration is reviewed in tandem with other factors, including grades, test scores, academic rigor, and extracurricular activities. But even with race-conscious admissions, many selective public and private colleges struggle to enroll student bodies reflective of the diversity of the U.S. population. On Thursday, June 29th, the Supreme Court concluded that admissions policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the U.S. Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. This effectively prohibits the use of affirmative action policies in the U.S. aimed at raising the number of historically underrepresented students at selective colleges and universities. The court concluded that Harvard and the University of North Carolina's race-conscious admissions program failed to abide by the narrow restrictions laid out by the court in previous cases, noting that university programs, quote, must comply with strict scrutiny, may never use race as a stereotype or negative, and must at some point end. And now I'd like to introduce today's panelist. Father Bob Dowd serves as the Associate Professor of Political Science and Vice President and Associate Provost for Interdisciplinary Initiatives at Notre Dame. Dr. Anna Haskins, Associate Professor of Sociology and the Associate Director of Notre Dame's Initiative on Race and Resilience. And Jennifer Mason McAward, Associate Professor of Law and Director of the Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights.
So the 14th Amendment of the Constitution says that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That's it. And so it's the court's job to figure out what that means and how it applies in any particular case. And so these cases, there are actually two of them, are Students for Fair Admissions versus the University of North Carolina and versus Harvard. Public universities like North Carolina have to comply with the Equal Protection Clause. Private universities like Harvard and Notre Dame have to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bars race discrimination by educational institutions that receive federal funds. But the requirements of the Equal Protection Clause and Title VI are the same in this context. So really the question in both cases is, can a university take race into account in its admissions process? The basic analytical framework that the court uses in cases like this is called strict scrutiny, as Eve indicated. So first of all, the question is the university using racial criteria? And the answer here is, of course, yes, they are. Selective universities are trying to enroll diverse classes, and they take cognizance of many factors that may point to diversity. So it might be geographic background of an applicant, whether they're first generation, whether they have a particular talent, or in some cases, the applicant's race itself. Once we're in the box of strict scrutiny, the court asks two questions. First of all, does the university have a compelling reason for using race? What's its goal? And does the court agree that that's a compelling goal? And second, is that use of race narrowly tailored? Is it really necessary to use a person's race to achieve the purpose that the university has set out? And the university carries the burden of convincing the court on both of these issues. So just a little bit of history. The debate about affirmative action at universities dates to 1978. In a case called Bakke, which involved the University of California at Davis's medical school. In that case, Justice Lewis Powell wrote an opinion just for himself, but for various reasons, it was treated as the controlling opinion, in which he embraced this idea of diversity and limited uses of race in admissions. But in 2003, in a case called Grutter versus Bollinger, which dealt with the Michigan Law School, a majority of the court embraced that approach. So since 2003, there has been a clear majority of the court supporting both the idea of diversity and race-based affirmative action. And so in Grutter, the majority of the court said, look, we agree that diversity is a compelling goal for universities. Diversity brings educational benefits, and universities have academic freedom that's protected by the First Amendment to pursue their own goals. And the court delineated 4 main benefits that flow from diversity. It ends stereotypes, it promotes cross-racial understanding among students, it prepares students to enter a diverse workforce, and it cultivates leaders with legitimacy in the eyes of the citizenry. And Grutter also said that a university can use race in a narrowly tailored way to accomplish diversity. And they said, look, as long as all applicants receive individualized review and you, the university, take into account all of the ways in which an applicant is diverse, you can use race as one element of diversity. You can't use numerical quotas, but you can certainly use race as one of many plus factors. Grutter also said something at the end of the opinion that the court last week really kind of paid attention to. The court wrote, we expect that 25 years from now, so meaning 2028, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further this interest in diversity. So now let's fast forward from 2003 to last week, when the court decided Students for Fair Admissions versus North Carolina and Harvard. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion for a 6-member majority, and there were 3 dissenters, Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. And the bottom line is that the court held that universities cannot use an individual applicant's race as a factor in admissions. Affirmative action in the university admissions context is unconstitutional. And I just want to highlight a few aspects of the majority's opinion for you. First of all, the court overruled Grutter, but they did so without acknowledging that they were doing so, which strikes me as interesting, right? So as we watch Supreme Court confirmation hearings, we repeatedly see nominees' questions about the importance of precedent and the principle of stare decisis, which is just a way of adhering to precedent. But this court is repeatedly showing its willingness to overrule cases with which the majority disagrees. Number 2, the majority is really skeptical, or at least somewhat skeptical, about the diversity rationale itself. So gone is any talk about academic freedom and the university's First Amendment interests. And the majority talks about diversity in a kind of tepid or lukewarm way. They call it commendable and worthy, but they also say that it's not coherent and is inescapably imponderable. So in terms of the goal or the compelling justification, the court is not really clear that diversity is all it's cracked up to be. And the majority even more categorically condemns the way in which universities have been using race as a plus factor in admissions. The court articulated a number of concerns, and I'll just highlight 3 of them for you. First, the court or the majority says that the racial categories that are used in admissions, for example, Asian or Hispanic, are imprecise and overbroad. Second, they're concerned that race sometimes might work as a negative, given evidence that Asian applicants were sometimes stereotyped and disadvantaged. And third, the court was really concerned that there's just no clear endpoint to the use of race, because it's really impossible, the court says, to measure when students receive the educational benefits of diversity. And so the court really focused on that 25-year statement in Grutter and was really skeptical that any end was in sight. And so the court said, so let's end it now. One line that got a lot of attention in the press was a caveat that the majority gave, and I'll just read it. Nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. So the court is essentially saying, look, we can't control what an applicant tells the university, but the university itself needs to make sure that it uses that racial information in a very limited, permissible way to assess the student's own unique abilities to contribute to the university. And so the bottom line is that the majority concluded that all college applicants must be treated as individuals without cognizance of their race. Universities cannot use an applicant's race in any way to determine admissions. So I'm going to end there. There were a number of separate concurrences and dissents, which may come up later in our conversation. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the majority's opinion.
Thank you, Jen. Father Bob, would you like to speak to how this case relates to our Catholic mission and what this means for us at Notre Dame?
Thank you. Thanks, Eve. And it's great to be with you. It's great to be with Jen and Anna as well. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today for this conversation. I think it's really important that we talk about this and we think about this and reflect upon the court's decision. I think it's important from the get-go here for me to say that I'm really just sharing my own viewpoints here. I'm speaking for myself as an individual and as a faculty member, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the university in this conversation. The dust is still settling on the decision, as I think Jen has made clear, and I think institutions of higher education, including Notre Dame, are still studying the ruling. I think Father John's position on this, and I think he's made it clear, is that Notre Dame's commitment to building a diverse student body grounded in our Catholic mission remains unchanged. And Notre Dame is studying the court's opinion to determine any implications for our admissions process. But I do think that the court's ruling provides us with an opportunity to reflect on our Catholic mission, the importance of diversity for realizing that mission, and then how we might continue to cultivate a diverse student body within the bounds of the law. So first of all, Notre Dame's Catholic mission, and I might also speak to education in the Holy Cross tradition. Our Catholic mission assumes first that there is such a thing as truth, and it is possible to progress toward the truth and an accurate understanding of reality at any point in time. And such an understanding is absolutely crucial for the pursuit of justice. Second, progress toward the truth is a collective enterprise. It's not just an individual enterprise, but a collective enterprise. It's impossible to make progress in isolation from each other and closed off to the natural and world and social realities. And then third, progress toward the truth and an accurate understanding of reality requires moving beyond the familiar and leaving our individual and communal comfort zones. That is absolutely crucial. So education in the Holy Cross tradition, we say, is all about bringing together the head and the heart. So what does that really mean in practice? Essentially, it means, among other things, that education is about more than just growth in knowledge and technical skills, as important as such growth is. But it's also about growing in awareness of the God-given dignity of each and every human being. It's about growth in insight, and it's about growth in wisdom. That awareness, that insight, that wisdom is to govern how we use the knowledge we gain and the technical skills we develop. Growth in such awareness, insight, and wisdom is absolutely crucial if we are to build a society that is humane and just. And it's also important to note that as a Catholic institution of higher education, it's important for us to be dedicated not only to serving society, but the church. And that church is multicultural. And so that is important for us to recognize here. So let me just talk for another minute or two about the importance of diversity for realizing our mission. And perhaps it's self-evident based on what I've just mentioned, but I think it's important to be explicit. Diversity is important for realizing our Catholic mission because it's essential with regard to our progress towards the truth, an accurate understanding of reality. And such progress is hampered if not impossible if we remain in our own comfort zones, surrounded only by people whose experiences are similar to our own and whose ideas are basically the same as ours. Further, the growth in awareness, insight, and wisdom, which is to be the hallmark of education in the Holy Cross tradition, is largely born of sustained encounters with people whose experiences, struggles, and perspectives are different from our own. These encounters are not easy, but we believe they help us to learn how to dialogue and how to make, and they also help us to become more empathetic with people whose experiences have been in some ways more challenging than our own. Hopefully we gain a sense of perspective and we become a little less likely to label each other based on some aspect of our identity or our background. We hopefully become even more motivated to understand and learn from each other so that we might be better able to address society's great challenges, including the scourge and the sin of racism. And finally, if Notre Dame is to more effectively serve the Catholic Church and help the Church to serve society, we've got to do our best to educate a broad spectrum of the Church and not just one demographic. The student body needs to reflect in a significant way the rich diversity of the Catholic Church, the most global and multicultural institution in the world. So finally, and I'll wrap it up here, how might Notre Dame continue to cultivate a diverse student body within the bounds of the law? As Father John has noted, Notre Dame is studying the ruling and considering any implications. But let me just suggest that it would be good for Notre Dame to ramp up efforts to encourage more students from historically underrepresented minorities to apply to Notre Dame, especially from, but not only from, Catholic high schools. We need to do all that we can to get such students to envision Notre Dame as a place where they can thrive. We also need to redouble efforts to ensure that students from historically underrepresented minorities thrive once they get here. And I know there's a lot of work going on in this area. We need to do all that we can to ensure that students from a wide variety of backgrounds have the resources available to them to help them flourish, and the mentoring, including mentoring and accompaniment. That is incredibly important. Because once graduated, these students are our ambassadors. They're ambassadors who will spread the word that Notre Dame is a place where young people of various backgrounds can thrive. And finally, we need to continue efforts to recruit and admit low-income and first-generation students. We know that these efforts do not in any way kind of guarantee that we have a racially and ethnically diverse student body, but so far we've made huge strides in the last couple of years, and I know that the intention is to continue to make huge strides in terms of admitting low-income and first-generation students to Notre Dame. And it has resulted in the diversification of our student body, and we expect that it will continue to do so. So I think we need to continue to do that as well. So anyway, I'll end it right there. I know that my colleagues here at Notre Dame are doing all that they can to understand this ruling, and I think that I know they're doing all that they can to essentially work on the areas that I've just mentioned. But I'll end it there because I know that we have, I think, a really interesting conversation ahead of us, and I want to leave time for Anna. So thank you, Eve.
Thank you, Father Bob. Anna, I'm going to hand it off to you to look at this issue through a sociological lens.
Yeah, thank you. And as Father Bob said, I really appreciate being here with experts like Jen and Father Bob and you, Eve, having this conversation. I wanted to start with a note just to say, even though this was somewhat expected of a ruling, it was a pretty hard. It was pretty hard news to get, I think, for me last week. And so I'm still also sort of processing what it means, given the history. And as even I can talk if it makes sense later, as graduates of the University of Michigan, when their original decision came down too, thinking about how these decades between decisions really have implications for individuals opportunity, success, and sort of perspective. So thinking about this again, as it was not necessarily a surprise, but still something that was really hard to hear when I got the news. And so, as this was advertised, we were going to have a conversation about the legal, the moral, and the social implications. So I'm your social scientist, and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the social implications of this. And I think any conversation about race and educational opportunity in the United States needs to be in dialogue with the realities of race in American history, in dialogue with the set of core values our country is founded on, as we maybe reflect on the lack of sleep we got as we celebrated our nation's birthday yesterday, right? Sort of what are the things that we're founded on? And then it also has to come in conversation with an understanding of the purpose of education in American society. So thinking about those three core areas, America really has this long-standing and clearly documented history of racial oppression and injustice. And the contention with this, with the core value really at the center of the conversation on affirmative action in terms of thinking about individuals, is this idea of meritocracy in the United States, and that anyone who can succeed, as long as they just as an individual work hard and they use their God-given talents, really focuses on a type of rugged individualism that is core to the American dream and a core to the way in which America kind of has been founded. And that is often juxtaposed to the social contexts of being an American, the policies that exist. And then the third part of that I think is really, really important, is the way in which education provides opportunity and access to resources in the United States. Not all countries' educational systems work the same way as America's. And so this idea that educational opportunity is very significant because it is this resource for economic mobility, for social success, for happiness and health, many avenues for that. One of the ways in which one gets to those, the main avenue often is a college degree. And so schools serve as these really important conduits of resources and opportunities for American children, and have really been increasingly integral sites of social mobility and exclusion. And so we can kind of think about how universities can be avenues for integration as well as social exclusion, depending on that. And then I think the other thing about education and schooling, as this is my area of expertise, is to think about our public education system. Is really built on this ideal of providing a common education for all, a place where academic access and achievement should not be dependent on family background or personal circumstances, and a common educational experience is provided for all American children. And you can kind of see how that is related to the Supreme Court's ruling, and not, depending on how we contextualize this in history. So this is why this decision is very complicated, because it really comes into I guess like sort of conflict with a number of ways in which America's ideals, America's history, and sort of core values that are central to the founding of the United States. And so I think about this as a sociologist of education that really considers race and racial equality in their work as something that hits really hard for both current college students, and you can think about educational opportunity and access as continuing intergenerationally, and what this might mean for future generations of children and families in the United States. The other thing that I wanted, so I think in the remaining minutes, I will just say this is not research that I have done, but one of our peer Catholic institutions, Georgetown University, has also recently put forward a research brief coming from the Center on Education and the Workplace, kind of talking through what next. Now that this ruling has come down, what might be some outcomes for this in terms of the workplace and in terms of education, higher education moving forward. And I have found this report really instructive and sort of helpful in thinking about this. I don't know if I can put a link into the chat to share with everyone. If not, I'm sure we'll figure out a way to communicate the brief to everyone. But this is a report that uses simulation modeling to see what the impact would be of this new Supreme Court decision on the future of higher education in terms of diversity. And I just wanted to talk through a couple of the models and some of the suggestions, and then I can pass it over to Eve to think about what we'll do for the remaining discussion time. And so one of the things Great. I've been just told I can share the link in the chat, so I'll do that once I'm finished. So one of the things that the report really asks is it offers 6 sort of fake simulations to see what the elimination of race-based decision-making for college access might mean. But they also do this in tandem with a number of the other sort of preferential treatments that's offered in college admissions these days, including legacy applicants, student athletes, and other groups that get an administrative boosts. Thank you, there's the chat. Other people that get administrative boosts for reasons unrelated to race, socioeconomic status, and academic merit. And so what these models kind of show is they show that if you take into account academic merit, I'll say, you can look at the thing. There's 6 different models. They all kind of do a little bit of a different modeling process to see what happens. Some of the broader conclusions that come from this research is showing that the models that expand rather than prohibit race-conscious admissions come the closest to mirroring the racial and ethnic composition of the population graduating from the nation's high schools. So that means, again, depending on the purpose of higher education, if we want it to model and mirror the current racial demographics of the United States, then we need to consider, this is what the model is arguing, we would need to consider race-conscious admissions. If race-conscious practices are banned, race-conscious admissions practices are banned, as they have been, class-conscious alternatives can create preferences for applicants from lower socioeconomic status families, including first-gen families, could partially compensate for the current enrollment in shares of Latino, Black, Native American, Hawaiian, Alaskan, and Pacific Islander students. So we can think about that class-conscious decisions can do something similar, but not to the full effect of being able to represent the composition of the current diversity of the United States. What they also then argue is that without race-conscious admissions and practices, maintaining or exceeding existing levels of representation for all underrepresented racial and ethnic groups would require upending the entire selective college admissions system, really asking, in some ways, colleges and universities would have to be very creative and sort of visionary in thinking about what they would need to do, similar along the lines of what Father Bob was sort of suggesting, including greatly expanding the pool of candidates considered for admissions and in limiting admissions preferences for other privileged groups. And that's often the conversation with the legacy admissions. And so something, again, to sort of think and talk about as this relates to every college and university in the United States. There's a couple more nuances that they make in their findings. I'm not going to read them all. One of the things that they did say that really is relevant to Notre Dame as an incredibly selective university is that if selective colleges do not also eliminate preferences based on student athletes, similar other groups, and legacy preferences, in the face of a nationwide ban on race-conscious admissions, the levels of race and ethnic diversity and class diversity that their models suggest would not be possible. It'd be unlikely to occur to be able to have sort of the racial diversity that we now see represent in both our high school graduating classes and in our nation writ large. And so this does matter. And as Father Bob said and Jen said, right, the dust is still settling, and we're kind of trying to think about what this might mean for the United States and for educational access and for racial awareness. This has major implications that could really change the face, literally, of higher education, and that links very much to what is offered in terms of privileges, access, and resources and mobility in the United States. So this is really something to be thinking deeply about. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to follow up with a question that kind of combines points that you made, Father Bob, and some of the things that you pointed to, Anna, such as meritocracy and this idea of rugged individualism and hard work and grit. It's a word I don't like to say, but you saw those themes throughout the ruling. What is the opportunity for us as a Catholic institution to challenge these individualistic narratives with some collective themes that we find in Catholic social teaching.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Eve. And, I think that in the Catholic tradition, we have what we call the preferential option for the poor. And we're called, based on gospel values, the life of Jesus, to really be cognizant of the great challenges that many people in our world face, and have a special concern for the marginalized and the vulnerable. And I think that the Catholic Church, Catholic social tradition recognizes that there is such a thing as structural sin as well as individual sin. And I do think that in many ways, people have been held back by structures, by social structures. There's no doubt that a structure like slavery has held people back. There's no doubt that segregation has held people back. We can go through a whole litany of structures that have put certain people at a severe disadvantage. So anyway, the point here is that the Catholic tradition recognizes that kind of injustice in the world and the ramifications of that kind of injustice. And the Catholic tradition calls us to take those conditions and the ramification of those conditions into consideration. When it comes to admissions, I think that it's really important that we recognize that there are many potential applicants in Notre Dame that have faced challenges, that have had a ton of obstacles in front of them, and I think that it's very difficult for many of them to overcome such obstacles. I think it's important for us to recognize those kinds of obstacles that students face, and to find ways, especially once students get to Notre Dame, to make sure that we do our best to accompany students to work through those obstacles once they're here. So maybe I'll leave it at that, and Anna might have something to add.
Jen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I mean, I think the contributions from Father Bob and Anna are so important because in important ways, it points to the paucity of the debate that the court is having, right? So diversity is a value, but there are other values as well that are at stake here. And the court back in 1978 said, we don't think that universities should be trying to compensate for the discrimination of the past. But what it's so important to hear from Father Bob and Anna is that those are values that, especially at Notre Dame, we really care about. And so the legal framework of this discussion points to an important value in diversity, but it's not the only value that we, especially as a Catholic university, bring to the conversation. And so reading just the majority opinion doesn't really help us engage with those broader questions of the importance of education and the church's commitment to the poor and marginalized. And so that's just a thought.
Thank you. So one of the critiques of the Supreme Court's opinion is that it may make just diverse students, particularly Black students, feel less welcome at institutions like Notre Dame. What are your thoughts on this, and what are some of the ways that we can counteract this and create a sense of belonging for all students on campus?
Man, you're asking the hard questions, Eve.
That's what I do.
I don't know if I have an answer, right? But I can kind of talk through this in a roundabout way, which is, as I was hopeful. Whatever I said, I kind of assumed, but there was a margin of hope that I had, particularly after the Milligan and Allen decision, that there might be a chance in which the Supreme Court is sort of thinking through racial discrimination and in a obvious way. But what I will say is that I think this decision actually offers, this is me being optimistic, I think this decision actually offers universities a chance to step out of the box that we have been sort of operating in, to think really creatively about ways in which, well, first of all, to think carefully about what this means for their mission, right? And every university has its own mission and its own set of ideals that it was founded on, and thinking really carefully about, like, now we have the opportunity to really do this in a creative way. What would that look like? And so I think that that does say something about what universities can do to make students feel welcome. And now it's not like, well, we have affirmative action and that solved everything. And so now we actually have to say, we don't have affirmative action anymore. What do we care about? And now we can create policies or programs or supports that really do speak directly to that university's mission. And I think that that's actually something in an optimistic but really now pragmatic way. Like, we don't have affirmative action anymore. So now what are we going to do as an institution to really think about what this means? Public institutions have a different set of constituents that they speak to. And I think private universities are different in some ways and have maybe a little bit more flexibility, or a little bit more, can exercise a little bit more creativity. So I look forward to working with and talking with and thinking about what that might be here at Notre Dame for our students, current and future, and with our administration and our current faculty. So again, that's how I'm trying to think through and process this. There's absolutely things that we can do. And I think there are things we're already doing that address this, including the work that you do, Eve, with the Transformational Leaders Program. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, Father Bob, Jen, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just agree wholeheartedly with Anna. I think, it's always been important to make sure that all of our students feel welcome and included here at Notre Dame, that they truly belong. And it's now more important than ever with this court's ruling. It's an opportunity to really lean into our mission and make sure we're providing the resources, that we're accompanying our students well, that they truly have a positive experience once they land here at Notre Dame. And I think the vast majority of our students do have a very positive experience, but we do know that we have work to do. As the trustees task force report indicated, we have work to do with our underrepresented minority students, particularly our Black students, and also some of our Latino students. I think that to mention just a couple of groups of students, we have work to do, and I know that that Father John and others at the university are committed to doing that kind of work. You're doing that kind of work, but it's important to recognize that it's not just the work of a particular office. It's not just the work of the university administrators and executive leadership of the university. It's our work, our collective work. It's our responsibility. That is all of us, faculty members, staff, and students, alumni, and friends of the university, to make sure that the Notre Dame is a truly inclusive environment. And this is called for in our Catholic mission. And so it really shouldn't be that hard, but it's easier said than done. But it is our collective work. It's our collective responsibility. We are all in this together. And so, anyway, I know that I look forward to working together with others to make sure that Notre Dame is truly a place where everybody feels like they belong. It's more important than ever.
Thank you, Father. I agree. Jen, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, if I can just add one thing. So I share the long-term optimism and sense of commitment, of course. But we know from the experience of states that have banned affirmative action by their own state law, such as, it's been a number of states, but California and Michigan, for example, we know what the kind of immediate result of that is, and it leads to severely plummeting numbers of underrepresented minorities on kind of elite college campuses. And so I would think that Notre Dame will be no different given that track record. And so and we know from California and Michigan, among others, that it takes a long time and a lot of very expensive recruiting efforts to get numbers back up to where they were in terms of diversity. And even then, the numbers of African American and Native American students never fully rebounded. And so we're looking at, I think, a long path ahead to deal with the implications of this decision. And so it's just important to recognize that, and also to realize that the diverse students that we do have on campus, we have a special responsibility towards, because the size of their community on campus may be changing and shrinking in ways that they did not anticipate. And so we have a responsibility to our current students and to our future students. And I think we take that seriously here, but I do think that the immediately coming years are going to be a big challenge.
I agree. And thank you for that, Jen. That was my next question, because we've seen in states like Michigan, where Anna and I went to school in 1990, whatever, when I graduated in 98, the percentage of Black students was at about 10%. It dropped to 3% after the ban, and they've struggled to get it up to we're still at under 5% at the University of Michigan, and that's after $500 million of investments, one of the most robust DEI offices in the country that is in some ways a model for many other institutions. They're still struggling, and so it's likely that we'll see that here. I think it's really important for us to consider what it means to have your community, or the people who look like you, substantially shrink in an environment that is in many ways challenging to exist in already. And so I'm very happy that we're having this conversation and thinking about ways that we can get ahead of some of this, and so we can make sure that students don't experience feelings of isolation, and we have the appropriate holistic supports to make sure that this is a place where everyone can thrive. Going back to Anna's hopefulness, in listening to Provost McGreevy talk about his vision for Notre Dame, and seeing us as a place that can be a culture shaping institution on par with University of Chicago and the like, but also distinct from in our mission. Is this an opportunity for Notre Dame to become a culture shaping institution in the ways that we deal with diversity, equity, and belonging? Any thoughts? No?
I'll speak up.
Okay.
And I'll say yes.
Okay.
I think this does represent an important opportunity for us to lead, to be incredibly creative. It's going to take a ton of work, as we've discussed here today. It's going to be labor intensive. It's going to require us really thinking together and collaborating across the university to make sure that we can continue to cultivate a diverse community within the bounds of the law. I think that Jen has and you, Eve, and have really sort of provided a dose of reality that it's been very, very hard at other institutions in states that have not been able to use race along with other factors in the admissions process. It's important to be realistic. This is going to be very, very difficult, but on the other hand, not impossible. I think it's important for us to keep hope alive and to recognize that it is not impossible. It's just going to require all hands on deck and everybody working together and thinking very creatively about how Notre Dame, leaning into its mission, can cultivate the kind of diversity that will help us to pursue the truth in ways that are very effective. So within the bounds of the law. So I think this is a real opportunity for us. It's an exciting time. It's a daunting time. It's a challenging time, but it's time for us as Notre Dame to really rise to the occasion and to do the hard work that's necessary to cultivate the kind of community that we really want, in one that is grounded in our mission. So.
Thank you, Father Bob. I agree. Any other thoughts? And we can move into some of these submitted questions. Anna, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think Jen has something, and then I'm going to follow after Jen because
Okay.
Just to follow up on what Father Bob said and some things that he alluded to in his comments earlier. So the U.S. bishops have made it clear that structural racism is a real thing and is a sinful thing and is something that Catholics need to be committed to dismantling. And so it seems to me that, in a 2-year span where Catholics rejoiced with the Dobbs decision, I would hope that Catholics would also view this Students for Fair Admissions decision as a challenge to commit ourselves as a Catholic community to doing the work of anti-racism and to think about how we view the role, as Anna said, of education in our society, how we view the importance of diversity in our church, in our society. And so I hope that this is something that, as Catholics, this is a moment that we view as a really important invitation to join in this important work.
Thank you, Jen. Anna?
It's hard to follow Jen's brilliance. So I would just say yes, what she said. And say, I mean, and echo Father Bob and Jen, and you even saying, I think this is a great opportunity. Now it's up to us as an institution to make the most of it. And I think Jen's calling is for us to really think about how to do that. And I think what's really exciting for me is to think about what the founding mission for Notre Dame is, and to see how it has language and values placed in it that really can be leveraged to do a better job even than we had pre this decision in really thinking about what diversity means. What does it mean to walk with the marginalized? What does it mean to create supports? And so I think it really gives us a chance to show our Catholic mission and work harder even than the kind of convenience that we were laying on with the idea that we have affirmative action. We can use that to increase diversity. Now we really do have to find ways in which to increase diversity that fit our mission. And I think that like Jen said, I really call to the Catholic faith to really think about what that might look like and how to implement it.
I'm going to move on to a more controversial question with the caveat that we don't represent admissions or ultimately what the university decides to do, but this is an issue that has come up in conversations, and so I want to open it up to our panelists. What's the implication of the Supreme Court decision regarding the practice of offering preference for legacy applicants seeking undergraduate admissions at the university? Don't all jump in at once.
Well, I can just start with some more law speak. So there were actually 2 separate opinions in the Students for Fair Admissions case from Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch that referenced legacy admissions. Well, Justice Gorsuch referenced legacy admissions, and Justice Kavanaugh said, look, even though we're taking race off the table, there are still race-neutral means that universities can use to pursue justice and pursue diversity. And Justice Gorsuch said, yeah, look, universities could eliminate legacy admissions, and that would go a long way into creating a more diverse student body. And so, I mean, I have no idea what Notre Dame's stance on this is, but it is certainly true that legacy admits tend to be more wealthy and more white than the typical applicant pool. And so actually just yesterday or the day before, some left-leaning legal groups filed a complaint with the Department of Education saying, hey, we should think about whether legacy admissions are really a form of race discrimination on behalf of white people. And so what they're looking for is some instruction from the federal government that legacy admissions also are barred. What will come of that, how soon a ruling or a decision might come, I don't know, but I do think that this is a conversation that schools are going to be having.
I'll just jump in to say that there's something to be said about the idea of preferential treatment to the poor, right? Like that is a founding core value of the Brothers of the Holy Cross, and thinking about that in Notre Dame. And so we can think about how legacy does not necessarily in the history of the United States equate with, well, legacy often equates with wealth, right? And so this idea of if the university did want to really lean into this preferential treatment for the poor, it's literally written into our the founding of the university in some ways. So it's not preferential treatment by socially constructed racial categories, but we can think about it as preferential treatment based on economic standing, class, poverty level. And so thinking about that might be, I mean, eliminating legacy decisions is going to be hard at many selective universities, given often who is on trustee boards and things like that, and thinking about that. But I think there are ways in which Notre Dame itself can really counteract or counterbalance kind of some of the existing preferential treatment policies that were not eliminated in this Supreme Court ruling in ways in which we really think about preferential treatment to the poor. And I'll just harken back to the Georgetown study that was just released, and that they were really making some arguments about class conscious admissions models being able to supplement in the short term, let's hope, but not necessarily thinking about how class and race are not the same. They are very different. And it's not saying that that's going to be a good replacement for, and it'll solve all of the kind of problems in terms of racial diversity in the United States, but thinking about class as something that might be a way to ease up some of the racial disparities that we know will exist because of as Jen and Eve have noted, of the efforts in previous states over the years to see that those numbers have really lowered, and the sort of economic opportunities and racial disparities have persisted. So thinking about those things, how they relate, what Notre Dame can do with class, are a couple of with class conscious admissions, given that we have the mission of preferential treatment to the poor, something that is creative and interesting to think through. I'll just stop there.
Thank you. So as we kind of wrap things up, I would like to direct our final question to students who may be tuning in or may watch this recording later. I know for me personally, this was a very difficult decision to process emotionally. Even though it wasn't a surprise, it genuinely hurt, given my own history, how I've benefited from these programs. And I know that if I'm feeling this way, students may also be feeling, questioning whether or not they have a place here. And so is there anything that you'd like to say directly to our students regarding this issue?
I guess I'll get started. We talk about we are ND and how ND is a community, and in many important ways that is so true. But as a community, it is so incumbent on us to reach out to anybody who is struggling. And so I want students to know that they are, of course, welcome here. They deserve to be here, and you are an important part of our community. I also hope you view this as an invitation to think about these issues in the context of your own educational journey here at Notre Dame. There are courses that you can take, paths that you can pursue at Notre Dame that will help you Even if this isn't your career path, just to educate yourself as a citizen about kind of the theology and the sociology and the political science and the law that surrounds these questions of race. And so I hope that you will use this as an invitation to not only seek out and build community, but also build this into part of your education.
Thank you, Jen.
I'll just say I totally agree with what Jen just said. And I would just only add that that you're priceless. You are such a valued part of Notre Dame, those students who are already here at Notre Dame. We love you and we're glad that you're here. And we want to do everything we can to make sure your experience here is a positive one in which you really grow in all the ways that you hope to grow. And we also really want to make sure that that our community benefits from your presence here. You make Notre Dame a better place, and we're so glad that you're here. And to students who might be considering Notre Dame, we hope you take those words to heart as well, that you'd recognize that Notre Dame is a place where you can thrive. And it's a place where we take community seriously. And we're doing everything we can. We'll continue to work really hard to make sure that our community is one grounded in charity, faith, hope, and love, where everybody feels like they belong. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks. That's a great question, Eve, and thank you.
Okay, I will always asking hard questions, right? I think students that are here and students that are considering coming to Notre Dame should really recognize the global presence of Notre Dame and the way in which Notre Dame and them as students at this institution can really work to push forward the well-being of the multicultural democracy that is the United States. And I think there's no better, I'm going to say no better suited place, I think, that you can learn to both think and process sort of the opportunities that our society offers to fully embrace social equality and justice than at Notre Dame. And so I think while the institution and the individuals in it sort of matter altogether, like there are, as Jen said, classes here, programs here that really do fully embrace and push forward these ideas of social justice, social equality. And I really can't imagine a better place to kind of dig in and think and process all the nuances of those than here. And so I would say to that, like, again, you're welcome. You're here. We're here together. And really find, thinking of this as an institution that really wants to kind of work, problematize, and think through that is really empowering and exciting for me. And I hope you find that too.
Thank you so much. Again, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. We'll continue to dialogue about the ramifications and implications of this ruling and how we can continue to work towards creating the beloved community at Notre Dame. Thank you so much and have a good day.